You've just been open and honest with yourself about why you've decided to take the first few steps to become the Dungeon Master for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. And now you want to expand on creating your own world. But what kind of world is that going to look like? Is it going to be a world where magic is prominent throughout every single corner of every city? It's going to be a place where maps of the existing world are scarce, but can be found in ancient tomes. It's going to be a place where gods are non-existent, and characters are lacking in divine energy. Well, these fundamental considerations are what we are going to be doing in part 2 of my introduction series workshop for becoming a more confident and considerate Novice DM. You've picked up your books from your local comic shop. You've got lots of dice to roll. But you're stressed by all the pages and responsibility, and you fear you'll lose control. So you wanna be a DM, but you don't know where to start. Me neither. Time to put the tissues aside. And time to pull out the Dungeon Master's Guide. We're going to be diving deep into this book. Specifically, we're going to be diving deep into page 9 and page 9 only. A little bit of page 10. In Dungeons & Dragons, you have some core assumptions to help lay the foundation for your game. Even if you don't want to be making your own custom world, these assumptions are made throughout most of the pre-written adventures that you can just open up and start studying. Now, what are these core assumptions exactly? Well, I can show you in a little thing that I've made up called the ever-present pentagon. In this pentagon, you see every single core assumption that is made about this game. First of all, that gods are featured in the world, and that they have dominion over its people and over every single plane of existence. There's also an understanding of religious systems. Different communities have different organizations that are dedicated to these deities. You then move on to the wilderness, understanding that much of the world is wild. The gods created a world where creatures can inhabit freely. And there's a lot of creatures out there that could be tamed or try to rip you apart if you look at them anyway. Another assumption is that magic is present. Magic is in the world and it exists in certain capacities. It's present in nature, it's present in people's spirits, it's present in the arcane weave that comes through the entirety of the multiverse. Moving forward from there, there is also a world history. The world has a history to it. Ancient characters, people, scholars who have dedicated their lives to understanding what the world used to be and what it will potentially become in the future. And finally, everything that occurs in the world is due to conflict between different groups, different factions, and different organizations and peoples in general. These are the core assumptions made with Dungeons & Dragons, and they're the thing that everybody would, without having to dive deep into the game, would make an assumption about this game. But maybe you want to alter the assumptions. Maybe there's an idea that you have and you really want to play it out, but you don't really know what could potentially be the limitations because of this, or it could be the potential possibilities. So that's what today is, looking at the core assumptions and questioning them, considering what are the possibilities if we alter them. Starting with the first consideration we're going to make. What if the world was mundane? What if the world had no arcane magic of any kind? Now, personally, this is one that, first of all, sounds kind of interesting. What if the world was just people walking around with swords, armor, steeds of a non-magical nature, and you basically just have normal characters, normal people, and they're going to be exploring and focusing more into the world just as it is without altering its effects? Well, there is one big positive I consider when it comes to a lack of magic, and that is the reliance of tools. Tools are something that I think people don't use a lot of in Dungeons & Dragons, but they can be so helpful. Having characters that are non-magical makes them think, how could I possibly get out of a certain situation based on the things I have in my pack? And having characters like that really starts to add a level of puzzle solving to your players without, having to focus on brain teasers or riddles or complicated switches. It's more focused on a personal level of preparation and dedication to character, seeing what your character is good at and trying to become more creative with that. Maybe your character wants to buy a grappling hook to attach to their large rope, and they can swing it across, and maybe they can latch it onto a tree branch that's extended over top of a 20-foot chasm, and they want to swing it across, and they get onto the tree, and they swing over to victory, rather than just casting the fly spell and gliding on over. That could already make the character so much more invested in your world and in their own characters. However, there is a big negative consideration to this as well, and that is what I think is more important here. It's the limitations that you set for your players. Having a world that is mundane might sound, intriguing. Everybody's going to be able to play with tools. However, you look in the player's handbook and you look at the classes available for your characters, and you realize that a lot of them do have a prominence when it comes to magic using. And that's kind of what makes them special. And one of the problems with this in saying, I don't want my world to have any magic of any kind, means that if you're bringing new players into this game and saying, okay guys, I want you guys to all make up some characters, do what you like, make up something that you are inspired by. Oh, by the way, you're not allowed to use magic characters of any kind. They are outlawed. They're dead.
Magic is dead!
Doesn't really set up your players to really be interested in your world. It more feels like it's your parents telling you, you can't do this thing. And the players are like, well, that sucks. And granted, magic is complicated, but some people want to approach that challenge. Magic is so interesting to them. They want to dive into it. And if you restrict them based on that, it can be a problem. The next consideration, what if magic is everywhere? The complete opposite of no magic whatsoever. Now, you might think that that's also something that's really cool. The idea of walking down the streets and seeing, people juggling flames like are attached to little unicorn horns, and they're flinging them upside down and jumping around, and they're able to levitate and spin and everything. You see bards on every street corner, they're singing. You see sorcerers leaping across buildings, and you see monsters flying across in like large giant magic ships or something. You see force fields established on all characters, and guards are wearing prominent armor pieces that are just all adorned with magical resistances of some kind. That can be exciting, and it creates opportunities for magic to be at the forefront. It allows you to really ask yourself, what is a potential way that I could be clever in the use of magic here? And that's not bad. You could say, what are the limitations of this kind of use of magic? What magic is prominent in this city, in this town, in this wilderness? You can create unique environments, and you can create fantastical scenarios. Maybe you've got a land where everything is just floating rocks, and there's no central landmass. It's just a large gaping pit. But these large rocks are where settlements are and creatures are and how they travel. It could be a huge, huge level of exploration and wonder. But you also have a bigger consideration, which again is the limitations. Now this one is a little different because before you were saying to players you can't play as magic users. What you're doing this time is you're saying, okay, you can play as non-magic users. It's just that there's a lot of magic around you right now, and you fighters and you barbarians and you characters that are just, dabbling into weapons or only interested in weapons, yeah, you're going to be having to face a lot of magic. And one of the biggest things to consider with this is the idea that, well, if there's a lot of magic, it means that magic's going to be less special. And that means that items that characters get when it comes to magical properties are also going to be less special. And that, to me, is the biggest, I will not ever just make a place purely just all magical. Because there should be a level of excitement in people's minds when it comes to this game. The wonders that occur when someone does something spectacular and spontaneous. The idea of finding something so beautiful and perfect, like a magical dagger hidden deep within inside a crypt, or going to the top of the mountain and finding a globe that is glowing with arcane energy, is such an amazing experience. The idea that you can just buy that globe in a corner drugstore, or that find that dagger just the kid twirling it on the side street, just, to me, it doesn't make it exciting. It makes it kind of like an obligation. And I don't want people to feel obligated to use magic. That's one of the biggest things. I don't want to make people not use magic. But I don't want them to think, oh, I need to use magic, otherwise I'm going to get destroyed by these demons, devils, and celestials. That's not something I want my players to go through, and I just don't find it personally interesting either. And that concept of limiting characters' ideas of what they're able to use, the tools that they have, and the magic available goes into the next consideration we need to make. What if monsters are uncommon? Now, let's face it, the reason a lot of people use magic in these games is because they're going to be facing some big freaking monsters. They're using them to figure out monsters' weaknesses, and they think that arcane magic is going to give them an edge against those giants, trolls, golems, and dragons and demons. They think that they're going to help them out in some way that where regular man-made weapons just can't help them. And that is true. Those can become elements that inspire characters to take on bigger challenges. But what this can do is also say to you, a lot of weapons that are focused on killing certain monsters are not going to be as prevalent, and they're not going to be as common. In fact, they're going to be like rare ancient artifacts. The idea of having a Dragon Slayer blade is going to be something that is only a myth. Maybe it's buried with an ancient hero, or maybe it's something that a dragon has actually kept to make sure that nobody can use it against it. And another thing that's actually cool about this idea that monsters are uncommon is that the characters that are responsible for killing monsters become something of legends themselves. Maybe there's something to be feared or something to be respected. And that's cool. It gives you an opportunity to create new NPCs, creating new characters that the players can interact with, a level of mysticism that they're not really prepared for. That can be something really cool, right? And then when they do face a monster, though, oh boy, you better make sure that monster is worth their time and effort. This is a monster that isn't just common. You couldn't just find a goblin walking around the forest. No. This is like a purple worm that has evolved into different ways. Maybe it learns how to breathe fire. Or maybe you find out that there's a storm giant that was able to go off into the astral plane and gather some great weapon like a thunderbolt hammer, and he will destroy the material plane. Stuff like that. Now, this understanding of lack of monsters kind of brings into the mind the idea of like, well, if everybody knows that there are no monsters, then what else do they know? And that's the consideration you make. What if the world is known? In the way of saying, what if it's all mapped out? What if everything has been plotted and planned and characters just have an easy access to every single thing to this world? They know the history of it. They know what it used to be. They know that castle over there used to house a vampire and now it houses a orphanage. Maybe they know there's a graveyard off on the side that was, used to bury fey creatures, and now it's been touched by Feywild magic and there's a portal somewhere inside. Now, the big obvious consideration to make for this is that, well, there's really not a lot of mystery. You know every tunnel, you know every dungeon, you know what is present to you, and you can just buy maps for everything. Oh, we have to go exploring into this deep, dark dungeon that hasn't been explored for 500 years? Well, maybe we can go down to the library and look in the archives and find, oh, look, we were able to find the dungeon map and we were able to explore it and understand that there is also some ancient traps potentially. And we know that down there is the rumored to be this ancient artifact that we need to get, but, we know what we're doing, we know what we could potentially face, and it's not going to be too bad. That kind of thing is something you could definitely make. And it definitely seems like a kind of a boring process, but it also can inspire your players to do something else. Remember, your players are also part of this game. And if they have the resources for a known world, well, they could be able to plan new strategies. You could learn to become impressed by your players because they look at the map and say, okay, this is how we get to that dungeon, but we also notice that there's a goblin cave just right outside of it. Well, if we turn off this way and we go into that Feywild graveyard, maybe we could hide there for a little bit, or maybe we could cause an ambush and bait the goblins to come in, because maybe those goblins have some treasure that we weren't expecting. So characters become more invested in the map and your locations, and they start going, what if the trade dispute that's happening over here, because these two can't trade with each other, what if we were to build a road that actually tied into these groups? Well, we'd have to carve into the mountains somehow. That's probably going to take a couple of years or something. Well, we could do that, but we also got to talk to the dwarves and see if it's okay with them. Maybe get, permits? Or do we have to fight them to the death or something? Oh, what do we do? So yeah, maybe you sacrifice mystery of locations. But now your players are actually looking at it and thinking, what are the potentials that we can do in this environment? Not a bad thing. And then, of course, you have the opposite. What if the world is not known? To me, this one is actually really exciting to consider. What I mean by not known is, what if the world is brand new? This world is something that is a sandbox. Everything your players do is going to shape the foundation of this world's history. The idea that you are the first maybe settlers or established characters in an untamed world where monsters are wildly going everywhere. Civilization is non-existent. Magic is untamed, as well as the monsters that you're facing. All of the concepts of a new world are so fascinating. And what's interesting is it also gets your players to really understand that the choices they make have consequences. Because let's say they were to travel to one island and they were able to find a rich, plentiful source of iron ore. They're able to go there and they find a local merchant or a mining group, and they're like, hey, come over to this place. There's a lot of ore. We'll give it to you, but we'll give it to you for 10,000 gold pieces. Right? 10,000 gold pieces. Why would we pay that much? It's because it's so plentiful and you'll be able to own that island. Otherwise, we're going to own that island and we won't know what to do with it. And you might be in our employ and you don't get to own this place, and we're basically just going to own you. It creates this really interesting drama when it comes to establishment and building civilizations and communities. And the idea of changing the landscape forever. What if you interact with a giant of some kind who is trying to commit a ritual so that he can get his own personal, private portion of the world? So he's committing a ritual to bring an entire continent up into the air. And your job as players is to clear off the area. And there's so many other things that you could do with a new world. The possibilities are literally endless. And that is something that I think is so underappreciated in this game. We look for resources and how-to videos all the time, but the idea of just a brand new world for us to explore where we don't have to be bogged down with the concept of lore or history, we're inventing the history as we go along, is incredibly amazing. And it's got so many deep, rich layers and potentials, and it just makes me excited to even think about. Now, that idea of a new world does bring up something very important to me, I think, and that is the consideration of the people who created this world in the first place, specifically the gods and the goddesses. What if they were present on the world along with your players? The reason this is a very difficult consideration to make is the idea that, well, if a god is present on the world, how much could they intervene in your players' actions? It's not just like an angel coming down from Mount Celestia or a devil coming from, the nine hells. You're creating a situation where your players have to sit down and think, why doesn't this god just take over the world by themselves? Why do they need us? That becomes a difficult consideration for yourself to make. But it also has this really big underlying thing that scares me a little bit when it comes to, again, limitations for people. If you kill a god, you are stripping an entire group, species, divine order away of its magic. They no longer have those, abilities to pull from. They don't have a god anymore. So you've just effectively killed one of the creators of this world. And the idea that they're on the earth with you is very, very, very terrifying. But the fact that they're gone might be even scarier. So that's something that I think could be done, but again, you could make an entire adventure of that. Maybe there is a god who's present in your world, and you need to find sacred artifacts and weapons that are in deep areas, and maybe you need to find a ritual to cast so that you can nullify their divine powers. That could be something you could do, and really, what you've got to ask yourself is, does it make sense to you to have a god present in your world, or is it better for them just to be omnipotent and just not really worrying about the everyday going-ons of people? Because you gotta ask yourself, what would a god do if they were walking around in the streets every single day looking and judging us all for the mistakes that we will make and the minor successes and major fails that we have every single day? And that brings us to the final consideration for this video. Are gods non-existent? Now, bringing us back full circle to the concept of arcane magic, what if divine magic was essentially not present at all? Well, again, you are nullifying character classes, and you can't have characters like clerics and paladins, at least not in terms of a divine entity. they could acquire their divine powers from nature, or even from the arcane. Because let's face it, not every god is featured in, this idea of heaven or hellscape. Gods are present in Dungeons & Dragons everywhere. They don't necessarily just have to feature in that good-evil sense. They can feature in different and unique ways. However, you, again, are stripping characters of divine abilities. And this idea of having no gods and goddesses kind of makes you have to really consider if morality is even in existence. What is good and evil? Is it something more natural, or is it something based on communities and actual land masses? Are things just born bad, or is there something of a gray area with every being? This understanding of a great divine place to go to and a dark place to descend, without a presence of that, how does it affect your multiverse? In fact, what kind of gods would do what for which specific group of people? Having gods, it just seems like this really complicated element. How can you even understand what gods are good, what gods are bad, specifically for your world? Like, what could you possibly do when it comes to understanding and establishing religious orders and systems? It just seems like a lot of work, right? It absolutely is. And the reason I know that is because that's part of our workshop. And it's going to be the next video that I share with you all. On the next video, we are going to actually dive deeper into understanding what religious pantheon you are going to be having for your world. We're going to be asking ourselves questions about what gods work for you, what gods don't, and what gods do you want to have available to players who want to have a connection to divine magic. But we'll be doing that next time. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, so much for watching this video. I look forward to seeing you at the next part of this workshop. And as always, take care.